Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello, everybody. We're back again. It's Billy and
Andrew. We're back and ready for another podcast.
And today we are talking all about super.
Yes, today is all about superannuation. So we're taking a real deep dive into it. We're looking at some of the benefits, some of the strategies, some of the things that you can do with your superannuation, and really hope that you get a lot of benefit out of this one, because it's something that all, if not most of us, have and contribute to.
Absolutely. One of the things that's often overlooked, but as a financial planner, and a lot of the work that we're talking about or we're doing for clients and the things that we're talking about to people is longer term wealth creation. And I wouldn't say that superannuation is easy by any stretch of imagination, but it's really easy because you're invested for such a long period of time. So to have that compounding effect working for you, plus the concessionally taxed environment. We'll touch on that in a sec, but it's really easy with a bit of care and attention to be able to grow significant amounts of wealth inside superannuation. So Andrew, over to you. Kick it off. What is superannuation?
Yeah, look, superannuation is just a trust. That's merely all that it is. Superannuation is a trust, and it's a trust that you need to meet a condition of release in order to be able to access. The technical definition of what superannuation is, in reality, it's an asset that, as I said, we all, if not most, hold. And it's an asset that you have to be able to meet certain conditions in order to be able to pull the money out, which can be a very beneficial thing from a wealth perspective because you don't have an option. As Billy said, you're invested for the long term. And it can also have some really good benefits from a tax perspective as well, which I think for everyone is amazing. Anytime you start talking about minimizing tax, I think most people have a bit of a smile on their face other than the ATO.
So Andrew, hit the nail on the head. Sort of two key takeouts there. So superannuation is really two things: a retirement savings system, and that's quite unique to Australia and I guess some other countries in the world, but it's not something that we're seeing broadly right across the globe. And the other thing is concessionally taxed as well too. So you pay a less amount of tax for the money that's going into it, and also the money that's sitting in there as well too. And the other thing that I picked up, and this is purely done by design, but you spoke about preserved. So the idea is money goes into superannuation, it continues to grow. And the reason why there's rules of preservation around it is because the system is designed to save for our long-term retirement wealth creation. And if the preservation rules weren't there, you could put your hand in the bucket and take that money out like they used to do back in the day. But the preservation rules are there to be able to keep that money in until you meet a condition of release. Generally speaking, those conditions are a few things: age 60 and you've retired, or age 65, which seems to be the retirement age that most people have got in their heads. So that's some of the unique characteristics that are around superannuation. But Andrew, let's talk about some of the tax benefits and some of the tax incentives that we've got around super.
Yeah, and I think that's the key driver around superannuation is really the tax environment. Very few people, you tell them that you're going to put something away and you're not going to access it until you're 60 or 65. Doesn't sound that appealing. Even though you can see the broader benefit, you need a bit more of an incentive in order to enter into that environment, which is the tax benefit. That's ultimately the real key driver towards superannuation. And there's two types of benefits when you're talking about superannuation and tax. One is the benefits on contributions. So you make a contribution towards superannuation, a concessional contribution. So this is a pre-tax contribution to super, and it's taxed at 15%. It's also deductible from your personal income. So let's just say you're making a contribution, and we'll run through it within the limits. But if you're making pre-tax contributions towards your superannuation fund, you're claiming a tax deduction on those contributions. And if your tax rate is above 15%, which for most of us it is, then you're getting a net tax benefit by putting additional funds towards superannuation on an annual basis.
Well said, Andrew. Absolutely. So some key takeouts there. 15% tax rate, and there are some incentives by putting money into superannuation concessionally, which means that you're doing that with pre-tax dollars. Absolutely. Good way to reduce your taxable income and good way to boost your superannuation balance as well too. Andrew, what about the money that's sitting inside superannuation? How is that taxed?
So exactly the same concept is all of the money that's invested inside of superannuation, much like if you invested money outside of superannuation, you're paying tax on two elements. You're paying tax on the investment earnings, so the dividends and income from those investments, as well as the capital gains and capital growth of those assets. The difference between that inside of superannuation versus outside of superannuation is that once again, it's taxed at 15% inside of the superannuation fund. If you're under the age of 60 and no longer working, under the age of 60 and still working, or under the age of 65 irrespective, you're getting a flat line tax rate of 15% on those earnings, as opposed to investing those funds personally and paying a tax rate at your marginal rate of tax, which, as we said, for most people is significantly over that 15%. There are some more additional tax benefits once you hit the age of 60 and you stop working, or once you hit the age of 65 irrespective. To take us through that, Billy, there's some really powerful tools over the age of 65, or what are the tax benefits associated with the super?
Let me just backtrack a little bit. So inside superannuation, there's essentially two components, and most people would be used to the component that's called accumulation, which is essentially what you do throughout your working life. As the name suggests, you're accumulating wealth for your future retirement. That's where it's taxed at 15%, what Andrew was referring to before. However, when you reach a specific age, in most cases for most people, it's 65 because that's the number that they just peg retirement to. What you can do is you can convert your superannuation to pension phase. And essentially what that does is it still stays within the same fund. A few bits and pieces change internally with your superannuation fund. But what happens is it moves from that 15% tax environment to a 0% tax environment. And once that happens, income has to start coming out, as the name suggests, pension. So you have to start drawing down or receiving an income out of your superannuation as well too.
I just missed that, Billy. Do you mind saying that again? What's the tax when you're over the age of 65?
You're right, Andrew. I probably should have emphasised that a hell of a lot more, but I did say 0% tax. So 0% tax on the earnings within superannuation when your fund is in pension phase. Plus, there's another benefit as well too. The income that you're taking out of superannuation when it's in pension phase is actually taxed at a marginal tax rate of a big fat 0. So there's a significant tax benefit to superannuation once you are in pension phase. And once again, if you've got a significant amount of money inside super, you could be drawing significant amounts of income and not paying any tax on it whatsoever, plus the money that you've got in there as it's growing, pay any tax on that money as well too.
That's why a lot of clients that we're seeing, as they start to approach retirement age, it's one of those things that you know that super is important, you know that you should be caring about it, you know that you should be doing the right things with your super fund, but it's kind of on the back burner because there's so many other things that are happening in your life. But then people start to approach retirement age, realize that there's a significant tax advantage of holding the majority, if not all of your wealth inside of superannuation. And all of a sudden, there's a massive push towards funneling as much money as you can or as much of your assets towards superannuation, and it can become difficult because of the contribution limits. So it's a really important thing to get onto it early and have a strategy early for superannuation and for retirement, because the sooner that you get into it, the more that you can plan for it, the better the outcome at the end. And just sort of another key takeaway based on that tax rate as well, keeping in mind the transfer balance caps as well. So I think at the moment it's just got indexed. So we're now at $1.7 million in total assets for them to be exempt from tax. Anything above that is taxed at 15%. So a large amount of your wealth that you can hold through superannuation that can pretty much avoid tax in retirement, which is a really powerful tool.
We might just dig a little bit deeper on that, Andrew, because there was some gold in there for our listeners. But so essentially with superannuation, if you're an employee, essentially 10%, as it currently stands, of your income is going into superannuation. That's mandated by the government. That's what has to happen. So you've got your 10% of your work income going in. You also mentioned a few things around different caps. So we've got a couple of caps that we can work at. So essentially, I guess it's fair to say that we're encouraged to save for our own retirement, but there's some things in there that the government, because it's so tax effective, want us to have enough money, but not too much in retirement, if that kind of makes sense. So from a concessional perspective, which includes your 10% that your employer puts in, plus anything that you salary sacrifice, which is the concessional contributions that we were talking about before, you can put in up to $27,500 each year.
Yep.
And then from an after-tax perspective, Andrew, because you can also put some in after-tax as well too.
Correct. So from an after-tax perspective, you can also put $110,000.
Just got indexed.
Just got indexed to $110,000 in after-tax contributions per year. Now, those contributions are not tax deductible. So they're money that you've already paid tax on and have already contributed to super. Within both of those caps, so the concessional contribution cap as well as the non-concessional, so after-tax and pre-tax contributions, there are some ways to put more money in. So you can bring forward some years from a non-concessional contribution side of things. So you can bring forward 3 years and put 330 and nothing for the next 2 financial years. There's also a period of time that you can go backwards on the pre-tax contributions. So there are some nuances within those strategies in order to be able to maximize. However, as Billy said, the government is really trying to help you save for your retirement, help you have money in a tax-free environment, but put limits as to how much you can contribute, because they don't want too many people having too much money and not receiving a tax benefit off the back of it.
So that pension transfer balance cap of 1.7 million is what you were talking about before. So if you've got 1.7 million and you've got that amount of money in pension phase, which is what I was talking about before with a 0% tax environment, that's fine. If you've got anything in excess of the 1.7 million, that has to get put into accumulation. So it's not like you can't have more than the 1.7.
Yep.
It's just that if you've got anything in excess of that, that will go back to being taxed at 15%, which is still extremely good. And it's probably the best tax environment that you can get. But really 1.7 is the tax-free portion of how many assets that you can have in super to really maximize that taxation benefit. And if you think about a traditional sort of family unit where you've got 2 members, 2 spouses, if you've got 1.7 million, that's each. So essentially you can have up to 3.4 in pension phase, in superannuation, paying 0 tax, and the income that's coming off that is at 0 tax as well too. So from an income perspective in retirement, those numbers do get quite attractive. So from our point of view, we're trying to encourage all of our clients to be able to work towards at least that $1.7 million to try and take advantage of that particular lifestyle that it gives at that point in time.
Yeah. The other thing to really consider as well is, should you be putting all of your money towards superannuation? Should you be targeting that $1.7 million or should you not? That's a really key question. It's the essence of a financial plan is what what ownership structure should I be holding my assets in? If your retirement plan is to retire at the age of 55, well, yeah, you do want to have some money in superannuation because you want to be able to take advantage of the tax benefits associated once the superannuation income kicks in. But you also need a period of time between the age of 55 and 60 or 65 when the superannuation income starts kicking in. So yes, it's important to put a significant amount of your wealth in a ownership structure can provide some tax benefits, but having the broader context around your financial plan and knowing when you're going to need to access your assets and how much you're going to need to access in order to facilitate your goals, that's what's the key driver behind, should you be maximizing the contributions? Should you be almost maximizing? What level of contribution should you be making?
Well said, Andrew, and I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record here, but once again, it really depends on the client's circumstance, their goals and what they're trying to achieve. But a lot of the common things that we see, and one of the main objectives that we're trying to get to for our clients is to get them to retirement without any debt. So one of the common trade-offs, I guess, for lack of a better word, is, are you putting extra money into your superannuation to try and maximize your future position, or are you trying to pay down your debt faster? That seems to be quite a common question that we get from a lot of our clients. And once again, really depends on circumstances and what it is that you're trying to achieve. If you're compressing your time frame because you want to pull up stumps a little bit earlier, and like Andrew said, retire at 55, And once again, like our previous episodes, guys, retirement means different things to different people. But if that's one particular strategy, then that could result in one particular outcome versus somebody in a different position targeting a different strategy. That could be something different as well too. So yeah, once again, a bit of a broken record, but it does depend on what the client wants to achieve and what circumstances that they're in. Just while we're talking about super, Andrew, there's a few different superannuation types or funds around. Do you want to give us a bit of an insight into what they are?
Yeah, so there's a few different types of superannuation funds. So what we've been talking about for really the last sort of 15 minutes or so is the superannuation strategy, which I think is the key to have down pat before you actually start embarking on what is the right type of superannuation fund. First, you need to know what you're doing, then you choose the most appropriate product. So the different types of super funds is the industry funds, which I'm sure we've all seen a lot of the ads going around. I'm sure we're all sort of fairly aware of the funds offered by a particular industry group. Above and beyond that, there's retail superannuation funds, mostly offered by sort of the big banks, have a bit more flexibility from an investment perspective in terms of their investment options. They generally have, all of these funds will also have an insurance option available within them that will have some differences within it. So other than the industry and retail super funds that most people know about, there's also what's called a wrap or a wholesale type of superannuation funds, which from a flexibility and an investment option perspective usually is the thing that will provide the most amount of flexibility in the investments. And above and beyond that, there's the self-managed super funds. Exactly what it sounds like, where you're managing your own superannuation fund. You can invest it pretty much in almost anything. The most common use of a self-managed super fund is investing in a property. Now, yes, there's some very large considerations as to what type of superannuation fund you should have, what's the most appropriate for you. Should you be investing in a self-managed super fund, or should you be investing in property through a self-managed super fund? All sort of comes back to exactly what we're talking about. And it all depends on the strategy. It all depends on what we're trying to achieve, and it all depends on the circumstances. So really the four main types of superannuation funds are industry funds, are retail funds, wrap or wholesale superannuation funds, and self-managed super funds.
Well said, Andrew. And I'll just elaborate just on that self-managed super fund one. We're seeing a lot of self-employed people starting up or opening self-managed super funds. Not only do you have the ability to buy property within a self-managed super fund, but just by its very nature, you cannot use your superannuation assets for your benefit today. They have to be for a future benefit down the track, which is your retirement. In the event that you've got a business owner that's operating a business from an office premises, there is some scope for a business owner to open up a self-managed super fund to buy the office premises in that self-managed super fund and then actually rent that office space back to themselves as the business owner. So the self-managed super fund is the owner and the business is the tenant. In that instance, that's perfectly legal, and that's a strategy that we see self-employed people deploy all of the time. And it's kind of like a win on both fronts, because not only are you staying in a property, you don't have to necessarily answer to a landlord, or there's the risk of being booted out by a landlord, but the rent that your business is paying is being claimed as an expense, so it's deductible. But on the flip side of the equation, you're also the landlord, you own the asset, so you're receiving the rental income as income in your self-managed super fund. So it's a really powerful wealth creation strategy that we talk to our self-employed clients about all the time, Andrew.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's sort of the key, is figure out or work towards what the strategy is, and then you can work as to what the type of superannuation fund or the best type of superannuation fund to hold is. Take advantage of each and every benefit that's available in that environment. The other thing that we see is the other key in deciding a superannuation fund, and it seems like the pendulum has really swung in this direction, is towards cost. Now, that's absolutely, certainly a key driver when you're examining the right type of super fund is what is the cost of that fund. It only answers half the question though. So there's been a very large shift in mindset, I think, in consumers deciding as to what type of or which superannuation fund they choose. And cost is the thing that we see a lot of people making a lot of their decisions based upon. But really, it's important to consider a broad range of things, not just cost. So what do we need to consider in a super fund other than cost, Billy?
Well, cost, like you said, Andrew, is important, but it's not the only thing. And really, the thing that's going to grow your retirement savings, the thing that's going to grow your wealth, and this could be applicable to all types of assets. It's not just superannuation, but you're looking at the overall return. So if you look at cost of a superannuation fund in isolation, and it may be a cheap fund, the other part of the equation is how is it performing? And essentially what you're doing is you're looking at the investment performance, you're deducting the cost, and then you're working out the after cost rate of return. And if that doesn't stack up from a investment return perspective, but it stacks up because it's a low cost fund, then that doesn't make a lot of sense either.
Yeah. It's like buying the cheapest property on the market. Just because it's the cheapest doesn't mean that it's the best thing to buy. You really need to look at the asset that's behind it as well.
You're absolutely right, Andrew. And we've seen a very, very successful marketing campaign that's shaping the attitudes towards the cost of superannuation funds. And unfortunately, it's a race to the bottom. But not all super funds are the same. Not all super funds perform the same way in the same types of markets. So from our perspective, once again, we come back to our clients' circumstances, what their goals are, how much money they've got in their superannuation funds. And really from that perspective, the position that we're trying to get people into is we're trying to get consistently good returns that are above the market rate of return in a competitively priced superannuation fund. So overall, on balance, the return that you get is higher. And if you look at that over a long period of time, and even if you're getting small outperformance over the years, you're talking about a significant amount of money in the long run.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, you compound out a small overperformance or a small rate of return above and beyond what you can get over the course of 30, 40, 50 years. And the small difference on a year-to-year basis makes an absolutely massive difference at the end.
From a performance perspective too, Andrew, I think it's important to note that performance works in both ways as well. So not only when an asset rises, but the thing that we often don't talk about is the performance of when markets are down as well too. So ordinarily we'd think of performance or outperformance as getting higher the high, if that makes sense. From a downward market, it's also from a portfolio not falling as far as what the market's doing as well too. So you can actually outperform in a downward market as well.
I think that that's one of the most important things, not just in superannuation, in any investment, is what does it look like when things aren't going to plan? That's a very, very important question because you consider a market cycle and you consider any economy around the world. There's ups and there's downs. It's not just ups. What happens during those downs is a key driver towards what's going to be the outcome at the end of the day.
Well said, Andrew. Well said. And I think that rounds out probably our discussion, all things about super.
Yeah, it's the very interesting topic. I think it's something that can benefit a lot of people, especially if you're utilizing the strategies and the super fund in the right way. So really hope that you got a lot of value out of it.
Beautiful. Thank you to our listeners, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks again.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.